Okay.
All right. And welcome to the second part of this webinar series of the Forwards project. So the project, as we already explained yesterday, is a Horizon project with 19 partners running in 11 countries across Europe. And our ultimate aim is to co-design the Forest World Observatory, which could be a European observatory for forest climate change impacts. And to co-design this Forest World Observatory, the project also offers spatially explicit projections and regionalized roadmaps for climate-smart forestry and forest restoration. And also to build a larger network around these topics, there is a grant scheme involved in the project where we invite third parties to submit grant applications. And this webinar is actually aiming to support those who consider applying for the currently open grants. Among them, we have the Citizen and Stakeholder Engagement in Climate Smart Forestry and Forest Restoration Grant. And the webinar is actually sharing or aiming to share some of our main findings so far, or the best practices we have identified so far to support the engagement of stakeholders by other actors. Yesterday, in the first part of this webinar series, we talked about the concepts and the contexts of stakeholder engagement, as well as stakeholder analysis approaches. And today will be about the good practices. So we will share two very different examples of stakeholder engagement. One of the examples will be an online engagement activity, and the other one will be an in-person engagement activity. And also the two examples will be different in the sense that the online engagement activity was, if you remember to the spectrum of the stakeholder engagement from yesterday, so the first example presented today will be somewhere around consultation or maybe involvement, and the second example will be a little bit more deeper level of engagement around involvement and collaboration. So we will have a chance also to compare how different levels of engagement can be achieved. And I forget to present myself. My name is Esther Kelemen from the Environmental Social Science Research Group, and I'm already giving the voice to my colleague Barbara to show you the first example.
Thank you very much, Esther. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So welcome everybody. My name is Barbara Mihok. I'm also working for the Environmental Social Science Research Group. And what I would like to present today is our lessons learned and practice of an online engagement workshop, the Forest workshop. And a little bit of background about this workshop. This was organized in December of 2023. This was an online stakeholder forum, which was organized by the Forest Europe. So it was a satellite event of Forest Europe. And we were invited to provide methodological support and assistance for organizing this online stakeholder forum. And the topic of the forum was about disturbance risk management as part of the climate smart forestry. Two main issues were addressed: transferability of these disturbance risk management measures and cost efficiency of these measures. The invited participants included forest practitioners, policymakers, and researchers. So What were the important points for us to consider when we started to plan this workshop? You can check back to the first webinar, practical steps. So here below, I will talk about the formulation, the research, and the watch out steps of this practical steps ladder. So what we considered is that this workshop is an EU level, a European level international workshop. It's a one-off event, so we are not doing a more thorough and deeper engagement process, but a one-off workshop. The aim of the workshop is knowledge transfer and content maximizing. So we are not doing conflict resolution or co-creation, or not supporting decision-making processes with the stakeholders invited, but we want to provide a communication space where the maximum of knowledge is transferred and the maximum of interaction and contact can happen. And what we also kept in mind when planning the workshop is that online fatigue is real. So those who are active in this scene and participating in a lot of meetings, they are sometimes get really bored and tired of online meetings. So we had to think about organizing this workshop in a dynamic and kind of lively way. How did we and what kind of tool we selected for this workshop? So we planned plenaries and also breakout rooms for this online meeting. The plenaries are very good to establish a common ground for the whole stakeholder group, and the breakout rooms provide a space for more intense sharing, where everybody can have a voice or can share his or her opinion along a well-defined structure and along a facilitated discussion. If you remember, on the first webinar, Esther was talking about how important it is to make the stakeholder engagement activity comfortable for the stakeholders. So it's also applicable to the online meeting organization, that you have to maximize the duration of these specific part. So we maximize it like 1 hour, 1 hour, 15 minutes, the duration of these sessions. And to make it more dynamic and more visualized and interesting, we used online tools, the Miro board and the Mentimeter, which we'll be talking about a bit later if you are not familiar with these tools, and also we'll use it on the next webinar a bit, just for the sake of the presentation. So the workshop itself was done by Zoom. It started at 9 and ended at 14:30. It had a coffee break for 15 minutes and a lunch break for 45 minutes. So we had a good net of 4.5 hours for the work, and there were 23 participants. And the structure of the workshop was like this. So we had two main topics, transferability and cost efficiency. We organized two separate sections for these issues. And in each section, there was a plenary presentation for the common ground. And then there were breakout rooms. And the people and the groups were selected along meaningful dimensions. For example, for the first topic, due to the type of the stakeholder, and the second, the cost efficiency topic, due to the type of the disturbance, the disturbance regime type. And at the end of the two, the second sections, we had an integration phase where we made a plenary discussions with all the outcomes, and we also have a Mentimeter exercise. I brought two illustration of what we gained from these exercises. So this is a Miro board. This is an output from a Miro board breakout session. And what you can see here, I won't read you all the information, but what you can see here is that this online tool gives a lot of space for written and textual data in a very, very short amount of time. So it's a very useful tool for gathering very large sum and documented information in a time efficient way. So this was the outcome of the breakout rooms after individual and group work. And the next one is an illustration of an outcome of the Mentimeter. The last question to the participants was, we asked them to give 3 terms that come to their mind first when you think about the transferability of forest risk management measures. And they provided these 3 words, and we created together a word cloud of the words. So it was a very useful closure and an integration and a co-creation, a simple co-creation process at the end of the workshop. So what are the outcomes and the lessons learned from this workshop is that in a relatively short time, these tools can provide lots of qualitative data and textual information, which you can analyze further along your way. That due to structure, it is important to have focused and problem-oriented discussions through the online meetings. Individual work, so give people time for themselves to work individually and put their thoughts, words, and anything on the, for example, on the Miro board, post-its on individual platforms seem to be very beneficial. So it means that we don't have to always promote discussion and group work during the online sessions. It can be very useful and very productive if there is space for people to work individually. And preparation of online tools, certainly before the workshop, is essential. So put everything up and fix it when you start the workshop, so you don't have to troubleshoot at that very moment. Okay, I'll give the floor now to Esther to talk about a very different type of engagement activities and in-person meeting.
And just as yesterday, after the 2 presentations, you are welcome to ask any clarifying questions or any kind of questions you might have. So compared to the previous example, this one which I'm sharing with you now was an in-person meeting where we organized stakeholder engagement in a local forest where there were some kind of initial conflicting situations. So this project was part of a larger habitat restoration project led by WWF Hungary along the river Drava, and a species-rich alluvial forest was in the center of our stakeholder engagement activity, which spans across nearly 3,000 hectares. And there are some very tangible environmental constraints in the area, like the decreasing water table and also, suffering of the natural habitat and protected species. And also, as a consequence, already some of the landowners see the risks of the ongoing natural processes. But activities or collective decisions are a little bit stuck because of the mixed property structure. So there are part of the forest is state-owned, part of the forest is managed by the national park, part of the forest is managed by a state forestry company, and then there is a part of the forest which is in private ownership, managed by private forest managers. So this kind of fragmented ownership structure makes it a little bit difficult to coordinate actions locally, and also even though there is a protected status of the forest, agriculture and how to say that productive forestry or forest management is having strong traditions in the region. So the objectives of the local landowners are a little bit contradicting to the nature conservation objectives. So our engagement process targeted or aimed to assess the social impacts of the restoration and also to improve a little bit the local relationships. And if we go to the next slide, you will see that this engagement activity, which I will share with you, the last one, which was a field visit and a participatory scenario workshop, was actually part of a much longer process, because we started our process with interviews with local people, including forest managers, forest owners, but also farmers, for instance, or municipalities, mayors, local administrators. And we also organized expert workshops and also, of course, collected literature. So there was kind of a scientific understanding of the whole situation, including the stakeholders, the conflicting issues, and the ecosystem services and the trade-offs between the ecosystem services before we invited all these different types of stakeholders together in one place. Also, we chose very consciously this type of process because our experience is that when you are dealing with conflicting situations, there should be already some kind of openness to negotiate within each of the actors before you bring them together. Otherwise, maybe a joint workshop will lead to some disastrous conflicts. So we already, throughout the interviews, we try to negotiate a little bit or at least understand the differences of the viewpoints and the seriousness of the conflict. If we go to the next slide, you see here that what I'm sharing you is this last big event of the whole process, which was a whole day engagement activity. So based on the stakeholder analysis, we selected local forest owners, the state forest company as the most critical actors, and together with the project leader WWF and the local National Park Directorate, they were those actors whom we invited to this one-day workshop. And the conflict analysis showed us that part of the conflict is basically misinformation and strong stereotypes against each other. So we decided to use this whole day format, including a field trip, to enable participants to really get engaged in networking and dialogue in the given environment so that they can see with their own eyes what we are talking about. In the earlier phase of the project leaders already organized workshops, but those workshops were in room setting using, for instance, maps and remote sensing data, which could be perceived as very visual support for discussing conflicting situations. But what we heard from local stakeholders in our interviews was that they didn't trust those methods, those scientific tools, which I mean the maps and how the maps were created. So that's why we decided to really go outside, be in the forest, and see their own eyes what we are talking about. So we started the day with a field trip Then we had a joint lunch, and then we had a workshop for a couple of hours where we worked in mixed groups. So the conservation actors and the forest owners were mixed into the same groups, and we were discussing the same questions in the groups. Okay, if we go to the next slide. Here, just as Barbara did, I tried to list some of the practical considerations of how we organize this one-day engagement activity. We started the planning early on, basically by lots of phone calls. So that was again a lesson for us, that especially with local stakeholders, it is not the emails and not the letters which work if you would like to invite them, but it is just basically tons of phone calls, directly speaking to them. We also paid attention to pick the date based on their preferences, so that nobody could tell us that they couldn't come because they didn't have time for that. So we just try to avoid these kind of accusations. And we also set up a rainy day in case the field trip is impossible due to weather constraints. We had a couple of invited experts, again fixed quite early in the process. And maybe one smaller thing, but I think it worked very well in this case, that we used very low-tech solutions. And this again was a choice, a conscious choice, after we heard the feedback of local stakeholders for the previous workshops, where they had all this mistrust against technological solutions and stuff like that. So basically what we did is that we just used, we walked around the forest, we talked, we also throughout the workshop, we didn't use phones or computers, we just used large packaging, paper and markers, so very, very low tech. It also depends on the age of your participants. This was a relatively old age group, and we felt that it worked better with them than technological solutions. Then, on the day of the field trip, we arrived very early to make sure that everything is arranged and everything is going well. And we already arrived with a couple of kind of icebreaker questions, or with a strategy. We were two researchers facilitating this whole day, and we kind of divided each other who will network with whom among the participants, so that nobody feels excluded or nobody feels that they are not part of the group. This might help in terms of building personal connections. And actually the field trip was the kind of the moment which made the magic with the whole conflict situation. So after the field trip, the lunch and the workshop were already very easy to accomplish, because I think that what really made sense here is that the different opposing parties could exchange ideas and could understand what is happening. The major issue of the conflict was that the restoration project built artifacts which kept the water table higher than previously. And that was a very painful move in the eye of the local forest owners, because they were afraid that the water table will be so high that it will be impossible for them to access their forest and make forest management activities. And then when they really saw the artifacts, they also realized that the water table will not be so high as they were afraid of. So it was really like just this kind of misinformation which caused the majority of the problem. Then in the workshop, as I already said, we formulated mixed groups of 3 to 5 people, and we used these large papers with markers. Here we originally had the idea of using post-its and giving time for everybody to think a little bit individually and then write their own ideas down, just as Barbara mentioned in the case of the online workshop. But then we also had to flexibly adapt to the needs of the local people. Some of them didn't have their glasses with them, so it was impossible for them to write on the post-it notes. And therefore, we just decided to go on with the visual facilitation. So basically, the two researchers who facilitated the group discussions took the notes, organized it on the paper, draw arrows and stuff like that. So I think that it can happen many times that you just make a decision to change one of your practices because that suits better to the needs and the capabilities of your participants at the moment. And after the workshop, basically, we had a follow-up activity. We circulated the summary report, and also the project leader, the WWF, started to organize regular walks in the forest for the stakeholders, so that it became more, accepted that everyone can have a look at the forest, they can understand what is happening there, and the restoration was in this way a little bit perceived more as a local stuff and not just something which is done by an external actor. And in my last slide, I listed some of the outcomes. The workshop had a content-oriented outcome because throughout the workshop, the participants listed lots of restoration benefits which will be considered useful for them as owners and managers of the land, but also beneficial for the broader community. And it was also identified that some of the benefits of the restoration indeed depend on the ecological state of the habitats, but some other benefits only depend on the process of how the restoration is done. And for instance, this finding was one of the main reasons why more and more social engagement activities were then followed up by the project leader, because we just realized that it is not enough just to improve the habitat, you also need to improve the access and the understanding of what's going on as a restoration to let people really benefit from it. And finally, there was an increased level of trust and respect for each other. And there you see a quote from one of the most harsh opposers of the restoration project, who said at the end of the day that, yeah, at the beginning I was very much against it, but then seeing the artifacts, I calmed down. So really it was just like, not just talking about, but seeing it, and then almost everything could be solved. So that was from my side, I think, for today. And yes, I think we have time for questions, any kind of questions. If you have any practicalities you would like to learn more about, or anything, or maybe you have your own experiences you would like to share, just feel free to speak up.
I'm also sending the presentation in PDF to the chat, so you can follow up on that. Can I add something, Esther, also, or just that in these two cases, we presented two very different engagement activities. And in the third part of the webinar, we would like to somehow summarize also the findings from the differences between these two events, or how we also planned them, what was the aim. So I think these two examples is like the two very end of stakeholder engagement, because the online event was about a very intense, very quick knowledge sharing and information gathering. And what also Esther presented was also had an added value of building relationships and building networks and to understand each other better. So I just wanted to highlight this difference or dimension of these two cases presented here.
Yeah, and also maybe one addition from my side that since COVID, there are more and more online workshops organized. I think you all experienced that we are also meeting online in these couple of days for the webinars. This is definitely a big advantage, especially if we consider knowledge sharing across countries or regions of Europe. So, for instance, in the Forest workshop, I think that it made it possible, so the online format made it possible that participants from almost all European countries could come there. And I mean, it's much easier logistically to meet online in that case. However, we also see that if the focus is on trust building and conflict management and stuff like that, then it's probably still the face-to-face meeting which will help you the most. So yeah, and also when we think about cross-national meetings, language can always be an issue. So in this case, in the Forest workshop, we also experienced that some participants were not so confident to express themselves orally in English. So there again, using tools like the Miro board helps a lot. So even if people do not want to speak up, they can write their comments there, and that helps leveling off the differences in language skills. Well, I think that if no questions arise, then we can just let you enjoy your lunch break a little bit longer. And thanks again for your participation today as well. And yeah, hopefully see you tomorrow. Or if you cannot come tomorrow, then we will have the webinars shared online, so you will have a chance to look at it later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.